My name is Steve Doran. I'm husband to Sharon Doran, father to 5 sons, 8 soon-to-be 9 grandchildren. I am ordained deacon for the Archdiocese of Omaha, a practicing neurosurgeon, and I'm really super excited to be here today to talk to you about consciousness in the body. Consciousness in the body. So here we go. I bet you didn't know Jesus was a boxer, did you? He's not. But this is my son, Michael. Michael is, or was a student at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame has this intramural boxing program called the Bengal Bouts. And it's a kind of a big deal. You know, they get like 6,000 or 7,000 people there, and this is the year he did well. He won it. I'm going to tell you about the previous year when it didn't go so well. So we show up, Michael made the finals, and he was fighting against Mike Lee, okay? Mike Lee went on to become a professional boxer. That's a lot of tuition down the drain for a finance major to go become a professional boxer. So our Mike Doran is fighting Mike Lee, goes on to be a professional boxer. And we walk into the Jack Auditorium. It is like something out of Gladiator. I swear, our son, Mike, is getting pummeled. He's getting the you-know-what kicked out of him. And my poor wife, Sharon, she's buried her head. Oh, she's crying, saying Hail Marys. And the audience, I swear, it's like Gladiator. They're like, finish him off, finish him off. This is not an exaggeration. Not an exaggeration. And so Mike, he's like this. He's getting dazed. And he gets a standing 8 count. Now, Mike's consciousness was impaired, but Mike didn't lose consciousness like poor Sonny Liston here. So why do I even bring this up? Why do I use this as an example? Well, consciousness is something that I think we all kind of sort of understand, but not really. And we sort of intuit it, but not really. And so I think one person said, for example, consciousness is something that I lose when I go to sleep and I wake up in the morning. You know, and that's not that far from what consciousness is. There's a very famous neuroscientist named David Chalmers, very well accomplished, written a lot, and he says, and this is very true, there is nothing we know more intimately than conscious experience, but there is nothing harder to explain. Nothing harder to explain. There is no accepted definition of consciousness. There isn't one. Everybody disagrees about what consciousness is. So the good news is I can say whatever I want and get away with it. So there's this line from T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, a poem, and it says, time past and time future allow but a little consciousness. To be conscious is not to be in time. I don't know what it means either. But what it points towards, and it's a beautiful line, right? And this is what's cool about consciousness. It's beautiful, but it's mysterious, right? It's mysterious. We don't really fully understand it. And Albert Einstein said the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It's the source of all true arts and science. So consciousness is indeed mysterious, but let's see what we can get out of today. See what we can get from it. So I'm a pretty concrete guy. I'm going to give you a roadmap of where we're going today. Keep the rails on. So I'm going to talk about consciousness first at kind of a high level, with the understanding no one agrees. Then I'm going to talk about the physical and then the metaphysical aspects of consciousness. And then I'm going to bring that into some contemporary issues, which I think you'll find kind of interesting because you've heard about these things and you wonder about them. So that's where we're going to end up. Now, as Todd said, I am a brain surgeon. But as my wife reminds me, I'm no rocket scientist. Thank you, Sharon. And I'm going to readily admit to you today, I am not a metaphysicist. I'm not an astrophysicist, and I'm not a metaphysicist. I'm a neurosurgeon. So, but I hopefully can kind of take some of these things and kind of bring it together in a way that I think we can have a nice understanding of this and give you something to think about at the end of the day. So let's talk about consciousness again at this high level, okay? I'll start off by reiterating again, there is no accepted definition of consciousness, okay? Generally speaking, though, people talk about it as subjectivity or personal experience, but there's other ideas of consciousness. Awakeness, cognitive capacity, the ability to introspect or to focus attention, to control our behavior. All this is wrapped up in consciousness. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to refer to consciousness in pretty simplistic terms. We're going to talk about to be conscious is to be awake and to be aware. To be awake and to be aware. Now, there's all sorts of stuff that falls under being awake and being aware, but let's keep that as our working definition of consciousness. So, consciousness, though, right away you start to think, oh, awake and aware. That invokes the idea of our sense experiences, right? There's all sorts of sense experiences. We know this. And there's so many layers to it. Vision. You can see a simple color, a light, as a visual experience. But then there's the texture and the complexity of a beautiful painting or a beautiful landscape or something. So types of conscious experience include vision, auditory. Again, a simple tone in the ear is one thing. The complexity of music, which kind of seems to surround us. And then all the senses are that way, touch, smell, taste, hot, cold. All those things are part of our conscious experience. And then there's this idea of mental imagery. I could ask all of you in here to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine it. What would it be like to be on the beach right now? And you could do it. I could say, imagine what it would be like if you were a cat. You say, okay. But you could do it. You could imagine. Imagination is a huge part of conscious experience. Now, actually, there's a small number of people who cannot imagine. Their brain doesn't work that way, but most of us in this room can imagine. And then there's our emotions, also part of conscious experience. Sadness, joy, love, all those things are all wrapped up into consciousness. You can see why we can't define this, right? This is just touching the tip of the iceberg on all the aspects of consciousness. And then one that's this really conundrum for neuroscientists, a sense of self, the ability to be outside yourself and look at yourself. That's part of conscious experience. And that's really weird, for neuroscientists to work through. They don't get it. I'm not sure I get it. There's also this awareness of oneself. And one important thing about consciousness, and then we'll go on, consciousness is reportable. You can tell somebody, or you can write it down, about what you experienced. Experience is integral to the idea of consciousness. So there's kind of two broad camps of consciousness. And so as Bishop Barron said last night, we're going to start off, and his talk was marvelous, magnificent, wasn't it? I'm so jealous. I shouldn't say that. He's so good. And how we kind of laid out these concepts in a way that just brought us in. And his point was this, that we're going to start off at kind of this high level, and our various sessions are going to kind of drill down deeper depending upon where we're at. So we're going to drill a little bit deeper into what he was talking about. So in the world of neuroscience and consciousness, there's kind of two camps of people. There's the physicalists or the materialists, and they basically say, you and I are nothing more than atoms, molecules, neurotransmitters, parts of the brain that work together. And I would say that's the majority of neuroscientists. Take a very physicalist approach to consciousness. And so what that does, though, the problem with that, it reduces us, right? It reduces us kind of almost sort of to gray and white matter. And I think that could be problematic. Now, there's some kind of non-reductive materialists who say, well, there's scientific endeavors that, we can study, but there's also some other stuff, some psychology stuff. And so there's some people who aren't hard, fast physicalists. But again, the physicalists, the materialists, would be the first to admit that the problem that they have is the most important problem to be solved in consciousness, which remains unsolved, is experience. how do I experience the redness of red? You know? And so there's this aspect of consciousness that a physicalist, a materialist cannot understand and explain. What I would propose to you, what dovetails from what Bishop Barron began, that we're going to continue with here, is this Catholic perspective of consciousness that's not reductive, that doesn't try to split us apart into spiritual and physical. So we heard a little bit about some of these folks last night. Plato, as we learned, he believed, so we're going to get a little background here about consciousness. And so Plato believed that we have this immaterial soul that's trapped in a material body, and it's like a prison. Or the other analogy that will be used is it's like the soul is the captain of a ship. And if the ship goes down, the captain's free. So there's this duality, this dualism that Plato espoused. And then Aristotle came along and said, I don't think so. I don't think so. And his philosophy would be termed hylomorphism. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on that because it's super important. So bear with me on some of these details because they mean something in the end. And Aristotle, which ultimately informs Aquinas, he said a person's a composite unity of an immaterial soul and a material body, and the soul is the formal principle. So let's keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, again, mentioned last night, Descartes, one of the big names in consciousness, and we've all heard this, I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. What was he saying there? He was saying that the fact that he was thinking that he existed was proof that he existed. It seems pretty innocuous, but if you kind of drill deeper into Descartes, he was very much like a substance dualist like Plato. And he thought that we were made of two different stuff. There's the animus, which is the mind and spirit and soul. That's a separate entity. It's non-spatial. It's the thinking substance, the res cogitans. And then there was the extended stuff. The extended stuff was like the body, the machine, and that's the res extensa. So we have two types of stuff in us. We have the extended stuff, which is our physical bodies, and then we have the thinking stuff, which is what our mind is made of. So that's where Descartes saw us as this dualism. And he thought that the pineal gland was where this all came together. He thought that the two substances, the thinking stuff and the spiritual stuff, came together in the pineal gland, and it was through the soul that mediated this, a connective law. It's not true. We know that's not what the pineal gland does, but that was his idea. So before we go any further, it kind of brings a point. It's like, wait a minute, it seems almost like you're using soul and consciousness as the same. You know, we can talk about Descartes, we can talk about Aquinas, we're talking about soul, but yet we're talking about consciousness. Are they the same thing? And the answer is no, they're not, but they're really intimately related to each other. And so if it seems like I'm sometimes conflating the two, that's because they kind of are. And one of our speakers, Father Spitzer, he says, the soul is the mediator between our consciousness and the transcendent, and the soul is through which we experience the sacred. And the Catechism says, the soul is the innermost aspect of man, that which is of greatest value to him, and the most especially how we are made in God's image. And it's the spiritual principle of man. So that's what the soul is. It's not the same. I'd like to give credit where credit is due. A colleague of mine, Jason Eber, wrote this book, which was really helpful for me, who's not a metaphysicist, to kind of put this together, especially when it comes to Thomas Aquinas. It's a book I'd highly recommend. So let's drill a little bit deeper here in Aquinas. And so this idea of hylomorphism, what does that mean? Aquinas says that a human person is an individual substance of a rational nature, and he drew from Boethus on this. And that the disposition of a human body is determined that it has a rational soul as its substantial form. What does that mean? What does all that mean? Well, so a substantial form, as a substantial form, the soul is responsible for the essence, the esse of a human being. So the soul is responsible for our essence. And the soul actualizes the body, the human being. And the soul is the unity of all our activity. So the soul is the being, the essence. It actualizes the matter within us. And it provides this unity of existence within us. And so as individual substances, we have this ontological dignity. And what does that mean? It means that we receive our existence from God. And as such, we are subjects that subsist, is the word he used. We exercise our existence autonomously. And the term rational doesn't just mean thinking. Rational encompasses wanting, loving, choosing, and it also includes all the bodily functions that support our soul. So the rational soul is an overarching thing. And so he goes on further to say a rational soul and material body are not two separate existing substances. As Bishop Barron said, I am not my soul. Remember he said that last night. They're not separate things. A rational soul, as a substantial form, is the actualization of the material body. So let's drill down a little bit deeper in there. What happens? When matter is informed by a rational soul, this new ontological entity, a human being, is formed. Neither the soul nor the matter that it informs is a substance. The two together create a substance. And so the rational soul has its essence directly from God. And it has its operations of cognition and volition, but they don't depend upon the body. The soul has functions that don't depend upon the body. So the soul, it can exist separate from the body, but it does not have its natural perfection apart from the body. And since a rational soul is not a complete human being, it alone cannot be identical to a human being. A soul is not a human being. I am not my soul, as we heard last night. Bringing us now to consciousness in the soul. So the capacities of the rational soul include self-conscious rational thought. But that could lead us to this conclusion that, well, if we don't have self-conscious rational thought, then maybe we don't have a rational soul, and therefore we're not necessarily human. Very dangerous thinking, but people will think that way, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So, because it kind of raises this idea, well, if death is a separation of the body from the soul, and our rational capacities define the soul, and we lose our rational capacities, well, does that mean we're dead? So all this background serves to kind of help us as we work our way through some of these contemporary issues. The important thing is that there is a single soul, but it has three capacities. It has a vegetative, a sensitive, and rational capacities. And the soul has all these capacities. Aquinas thought that during development, you first, we're just tiny little egg and sperm united. The vegetative soul informed the embryo. And then as we developed sense organs, then the sensitive soul informed that. And then later, as we had the ability to think, then the rational soul informed that. Whether that's true or not, what's true, though, is that the soul, again, emphasizes the soul has these three capacities, these three powers. And so that means that death is the loss of all of the soul's capacities, not just one. You are dead when the soul is dead, when all its capacities are lost. Now, Aquinas thought that there was a primary organ, and that's by which the soul, operated. And he thought the primary organ was the heart. I would say to you the brain's a better definition of the primary organ. So the primary organ is the way by which the soul integrates, and it becomes the central organizer of the body. The brain, I think, best fits that. So drilling a little bit deeper. Okay, is the rational soul then and the brain the same thing? No, it's not. A rational soul is not identified with, reducible to, located in the brain. And while the human person's soul informs the body, and it actualizes the body's parts and helps those functions operate, it is not, the brain does all that, but it is not the soul. The brain is the primary integrator, but it would be erroneous to say the brain is the soul, an important fact. Then finally, bringing us to death. What is death? As we mentioned, death is the irreversible loss of a human being's rational, sensitive, vegetative capacities, and that is when a soul is dead and the person is dead. And when this is irreversibly lost, the soul can no longer support the body's proper function, and the person is no longer alive. That's what death is. Whew. Okay, so we got a little Aquinas underneath of us. So let's talk about some things that maybe spark our interest now a little bit. I'm going to talk about contemporary issues in consciousness. And so we're going to talk about disorders of consciousness, brain death, enhancement, and transhumanism. Now, there's a lot of other issues, contemporary issues in consciousness that I'm not going to talk about without time. Dementia, mental illness, drug-induced states, all those things are contemporary issues, but we're going to focus on these other ones. You probably remember Terri Schiavo, don't you, folks? You know, yeah, Terri was 29 years old, and she had a heart attack and had an anoxic brain injury. And so Terri was not on a ventilator, but Terri couldn't eat or drink. She could breathe, but she couldn't eat or drink, so she had a feeding tube. And you probably remember this story. Terri's husband, he thought that Terri wouldn't want this. And so he petitioned the caregivers, you know, I want this feeding tube gone. Terri wouldn't want this. And Terri's parents disagreed. They thought that Terri was still very much alive and deserving of care that we're all due. Love, shelter, food, all those things. And it ended up being this very, very public. You probably remember this. It was going on for 7 years. It got to the courts. It was in the newspapers all the time. Terri Schiavo, Terri Schiavo, Terri Schiavo. Well, ultimately, after 7 years, her husband prevailed in the courts. Her feeding tube was withdrawn, and she died. So this kind of brings us to disorders of consciousness as a template. Consciousness, and if we speak of consciousness in the sense of being awake and aware, as the definition we're working with, it's a continuum. It's not a on-off type of thing. And so first, there's normal. And I will propose to you everyone in this room is normal as far as their consciousness goes. We'll accept that at least. Kind of the next lower level of consciousness would be the minimally conscious state. And the minimally conscious state would be someone who is awake and aware, but impaired. So they might have eye-opening. They have normal sleep and wake cycles. They might verbalize a little bit. They might follow some simple commands. So that would be what's called the minimally conscious state. Then there's what's called the unresponsiveness wakefulness syndrome, what used to be called the persistent vegetative state. Terrible words. John Paul railed against this. We don't use it. But that's what Terri Schiavo fit best, this unresponsiveness wakefulness syndrome. Awake, but not aware. You know, remember Terri. She would open her eyes, but she wouldn't follow commands. She wouldn't verbalize. So that would be Terri's case. And then there's coma. Coma would be absence of both wakefulness and awareness. Both are gone. And even within coma, there's a gradation of that. And us neurosurgeons, we use something called the Glasgow Coma Scale to further specify levels of coma. And then finally, there's brain death. There's brain death. So those are the various disorders of consciousness. So what this does, it kind of raises the question, when is a person no longer a person? When is a person no longer a person? And so that's why we have to have this foundation that's rooted in something other than opinion, that's rooted in faith, that's rooted in theology, rooted in philosophy, and that's why Aquinas is so important here. Because there's people out there who say you're dead when your brain, your cerebral functions are no longer functioning properly. You're dead. Those would be the folks who say, well, you know, Terri Schiavo's not really alive. You know, she's just in this shell, right? And as such, then, we can treat Terri or similar people in a different way. They're not worthy of love. They're not worthy of shelter. They're not worthy of food. It's a really super dangerous position to hold, and I propose to you that it is not uncommon at all. That many people will say, you are no longer a person when your brain no longer functions properly. Think about that slippery slope. I'm sure many of us here have been touched by dementia in our families, right? And I would propose to you that no one here, or I hope no one here would ever think, well, my father was still very much a person. Even when his brain stopped functioning, he was my dad. How dare you? How dare you? But it's out there. And this is where, what's our take home? It's to push back and say, no, that's not right. And to have the tools to say, no, no, that's not right. Let's talk about this. Let's think about this. So the critique here, of course, is that, if Terry Schiavo is dead, we're ignoring the other capacities of the soul. To be dead, the whole soul has to be dead. Terry still had vegetative, and she still had some degree of sensible powers, okay? So we would say, as Catholics, following Aquinas, following Aristotle, Terry is very much alive. Well, that brings us to this. Anybody know who this is? This is Jahai McMath. Jahai was 13, and she went to have a tonsillectomy, right? And so routine tonsillectomy, and Jahai had a terrible complication. I remember my professor of neurosurgery or surgery said to us, you do dangerous things. You do dangerous things. There's no simple surgery, and here's a classic example where Jahai went in for tonsillectomy. It's a dangerous thing, And so she had a terrible complication, bleeding complication. She lost blood flow to her brain and had an anoxic brain injury. And Jahai was, by all measures, declared brain dead. Maybe you remember this case. What happened is that Jahai was living in California, and her caregivers basically told the parents is that, I'm sorry, your daughter is legally dead. Her brain is no longer functioning. She's dead. And the parents pushed back. The parents said, no, we don't believe that. And so they petitioned to have her taken to, where'd she get taken to? New Jersey. And there was a conscientious objection, religious exemption. And so then Jahai was supported with a ventilator, with medications, with a feeding tube. And Jahai, this is where it gets wonky. What word do you even use here? If she's dead, does she survive now? Does she live now? Our language even kind of struggles with this a little bit. Jahai was supported for another 4 years. 4 years after being declared brain dead. And brain death is supposed to be irreversible and permanent. And she went through puberty. She was some videotapes showing her having maybe some purposeful movements. And so it really created this conundrum. Was she ever brain dead to begin with? Or she was brain dead but got better, but brain death's supposed to be forever? Or maybe she's still brain dead but doesn't look brain dead. So Jahai's case, a very famous case about brain death that people have heard about. And what this does, though, it raises this point of brain death. And I introduced this topic. What does that even mean? Well, in the early 1900s and going backwards, a person was dead when they stopped breathing and their heart stopped, right? You've seen the Western movies, Doc puts his ear on the chest and doesn't hear the heart and doesn't hear the breathing, and he puts a mirror in front of the nose and no mist, he's dead. That's what it was. That's what death was. But then technology caught up, and now people who would have otherwise have died were put on ventilators, and most of those people very quickly passed. Their brain didn't function. There wasn't the support that was there. And so even then, even though there was ventilators, people still died pretty quickly. Well, a single event changed everything. It was the first heart transplant. And it raised the question as oh, wait a minute. Where did you get that heart? You can't take a heart from someone who's alive, because that would kill them, wouldn't it? And so within a short time, Harvard came up with the neurological criteria for death, which it wasn't necessarily fully intended to support transplantation, but it is, and it's used in other areas. But basically the Harvard criteria, which is used to this day, says you are dead when your entire brain is dead. When the brainstem is dead, your higher cerebral functions are dead, then you're dead. And then, and only then, can someone have their organs taken. Well, the problem is Jahai's case isn't unique. As our technology has advanced, there's been more and more cases of individuals who were declared brain dead, who were supported for extended periods of time. For example, there's been reported dozens of women declared brain dead who were supported and went on to gestate the baby, and the babies were delivered. Recently, for example, there was, you may have seen this, there's some experiments being performed on an individual or individuals who were declared brain dead, and then their families consented to have them receive a genetically modified pig kidney so that they can see whether or not a pig kidney would work in a human being. So that's all sorts of things come up. Well, wait a minute. If this person is dead and you're putting a pig kidney in them, are you experimenting on a corpse? But if they're alive, are you experimenting on someone who's still alive? So just kind of created all sorts of conundrums. And then there's a very famous case out of Omaha, where I'm from. There's a boy who at age 4 had meningitis and was declared brain dead. And for 20 years, he was supported medically. And when he finally, I want to say when he finally died, but I thought he died, right? Again, the language makes it hard here. So when his organs stopped, and when he reached cardiovascular collapse, they did an autopsy, and all they found was this calcified block of tissue, no brain at all. Yet for 20 years, with medical support, he was able to be supported. So what this brings up is what we're discovering is that probably not a small number of people who've been declared brain dead, which means your whole brain is dead, actually have a little bit of the brain still working, called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is important for blood pressure, hormonal function, temperature regulation, things like that. So many patients who have been previously thought to be brain dead probably still have a functioning hypothalamus. The problem is it's really tough to measure whether or not a hypothalamus is functioning or not. So where does that leave us? How do we deal with this? You know, it's interesting. Ethicists have used Thomistic Aquinas philosophy to argue both for and against brain death. And I will tell you that currently, I don't want anybody leaving this room, saying that, Doran's bashing organ donation or something like that. That's not it at all. Both John Paul and Benedict gave what I would call provisional endorsement of organ donation, organ transplantation. But they both said, essentially, there cannot be the slightest bit of arbitrariness. It has to be absolutely true. And as technology advances, we're kind of in the situation, well, maybe we need to take another look at this. I mean, for the moment, for now, you as a Catholic can receive and donate organs with moral certitude. Now, there's a difference between mathematic and moral certitude, right? With moral certitude, you can donate, you can receive organs. But big topic of discussion, there's a symposium planned at Catholic University in February I hope to be part of, that's going to try to distill some of this down even further. Okay, so brain death. Okay, so in our time left, I'd like to talk a little bit about transhumanism. Okay, and this is this idea, or enhancement. So enhancement can include a lot of different things. It includes pharmacological enhancement, gene therapy, all sorts of stuff. We're going to limit it to neurological enhancement. And there's the Transhumanism Association, whose goal is to make us better than well, as if well isn't good enough. That's what the Transhumanism Association wants to do. It wants to use technology, gene therapy, AI, brain-machine interfaces, all those things to make us better than well, okay? So we'll touch on a little highlights here. This is not a new idea. Aldous Huxley, he wrote Brave New World. He said way back in 1957, he said, the human being the human species can, if it wishes, transcend itself. We need a new name for this belief, transhumanism. So transhumanism as a term has been around for a very long time. So it's this growing interest in using, brain-machine interfaces, computer interfaces, things like that. Well, this is a reality now. This isn't, quite frankly, anything new. But how do we use this technology? Can we use it to restore consciousness? Can we use it to enhance consciousness? Can we use it to upload our consciousness to the cloud? All those types of things. This is where we're at now, and this all kind of feeds into the transhumanism movement. So again, this isn't anything new, the idea of enhancement. I've put these things in for years. They're called deep brain stimulators. And basically it's a device, an electrode that gets put into the brain, stimulates the brain, and mostly it's used to treat things like movement disorders, Parkinson's disease, essential tremor, things like that. But I've also put it in someone who had, a couple patients who had Tourette's syndrome. It's been used for obsessive compulsive disorder. It's been used for depression. So now we're kind of feeding into things that are a little bit not quite so physical. I mean, it's all physical, but it's kind of moving into other areas. And there's a patient of mine I'd like to tell you about named Danny. Danny was in a car that was struck by another vehicle. That vehicle was being chased by the police. Danny suffered a terrible brain injury, and the driver died. And so Danny and his parents were testifying at our legislature to change the laws regarding police pursuit. That's why I have a picture of Danny. Danny has subsequently passed away. When I first met Danny, he would be very similar to Terry Schiavo. Danny had normal sleep and wake cycles, but he wouldn't verbalize. He wouldn't seem to attend to his mother. Needed a feeding tube, all that. So very much like Terry Schiavo. I then put a stimulator in his brain, and Danny woke up to a degree. Danny improved to the minimally conscious state, where Danny now could look at his mom. Danny could now verbalize. And this is like 15 years later. This isn't like something like a few months later. This is like years later. And now he would verbalize a little bit. Now he would interact with his mom. Now he would say yes and no. His mom was thrilled. Now, to the average person, maybe they didn't see a big difference, but his mom was thrilled. And so through an electronic device, I was able to enhance his consciousness. This is new. This is not new. Well, then there's Elon. Elon's everywhere. He's everywhere. And you've probably heard of Neuralink, maybe, right? You've seen this on television, things like that. The goal of Neuralink, at least initially, is to help individuals who have spinal cord injury or brain injuries and help improve their function. That's the goal of Neuralink, which is a very noble, ethical, moral thing to do. Really not any different than what I've done with deep brain stimulation. The difference is now it's all self-contained. You don't, well, so is deep brain stimulation, but it's at the next level, and we'll talk about it. But Elon is the first to say that while their first goal is to help people with spinal cord injuries and brain injuries, he says brain-machine interfaces that could one day allow people to store memories as a backup and restore memories. That's what we're working on too. He says that, this is many years in the future. Our immediate goal is to treat these other disorders. But he says it's something that's probably going to happen because we're not breaking the laws of physics in doing this. So this is Neuralink's goal, long term, is to be able to preserve memory, to allow consciousness to a computer. So this is looming. So this is the device. There's these very tiny little electrodes that are implanted. All this is underneath the skull. And it's so fragile we need this computer to put it in. And so then the first patient is this guy who had a spinal cord injury. And he, again, way after the injury, so any chance for improvement was already passed. He had the device implanted. And within a very, very short period of time, after some training and programming with his mind, he could move a cursor on the computer screen. And very rapidly, he got to the point where he could play Mario Kart and beat his friends, something he couldn't do before he got paralyzed. He could play Mario Kart better now than he could before he was injured. Isn't that amazing? Super amazing. Now, he lost some of his function probably because the tiny little electrodes withdrew. So they reprogrammed him and retrained him. And within a short time, he got even better than that. So that's the first patient. And again, primarily to restore function. So again, getting back to this idea that Elon has, we think at some point we're going to preserve memories and upload them to the cloud. Is that possible? Well, there's two major obstacles to that. The first is an artificial computer that's robust enough to handle that. Well, we're really close to that already. I mean, goodness, we're all familiar with, large language AI, ChatGPT, all that. So the sophistication of computers, that's not the problem. The problem is, how do we map the brain and get it to the computer? That's the main problem. Now, it's not insurmountable, probably. There's some experiments that have been going on for 10 years where they took a roundworm. A roundworm brain only has 300 neurons. But using electron microscopy, we're able to map all the pathways in the roundworm brain and put it in a computer. So we've got this uploaded brain of a roundworm in a computer. Now, we're a long ways away from that for humans. And also kind of begs the point, well, you had to kill the worm to get their brain in here. That's probably not a good model for us humans. So where does that leave us? Well, there's something called the Connectome Project, Human Connectome Project. And what they're doing is using functional MRI scans to try to map out all the various pathways in the human brain, map them out, and then take that information and upload it to a computer. So again, we're decades away from this, but conceptually, it's not far-fetched. And so the Human Connectome Project is working on this. And that doesn't kill you. Okay, you can do scans and upload the consciousness. So it overcomes that. The final kind of macabre thing that's out there right now is a company called Nectome. Nectome is trying to do memory preservation. What they do is they want to take a brain and they want to slice it super, super thin, kind of what they did with the roundworm, and then analyze the pathways and then upload it to a computer. Again, kind of like the worm problem, you have to die to submit to this. Not a great model. So they have to infuse this embalming solution just before you die. You essentially get killed by the process. You might say, this sounds terrible. Who would think of this? Actually, MIT was one of the original people who were looking into this. And Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, he signed up. He's on the list. He's on the list. Before he dies, he wants his brain embalmed and then sliced and diced. Kind of reminds us, remember Disney? I don't know if he's still frozen in a vat of ice someplace or not. Anyway, so let's draw this to a close. First of all, where do we start? We start off with a definition of consciousness. There isn't one. Thank you. That's great. Then we looked at the physical and metaphysical aspect of consciousness. Kind of did a little deep dive into a little St. Thomas Aquinas to kind of inform us about how we make decisions. And then we went to these contemporary issues in consciousness. We looked at disorders of consciousness. We looked at brain death. We looked at enhancement. We could spend days and days and days on this. So what I want to leave you with is this. Okay, I want to leave you with this. This is published this year, Dignitas Infinitum. And I think this applies to every talk you're going to hear today. And what it says is that every human person possesses an infinite dignity, inalienably grounded in his or her own being, which prevails in every state, beyond every circumstance, state, or situation a person may ever encounter. All of us here have an intrinsic dignity, regardless of the station in life that we're at. And this document talks about 4 types of dignity. There's the ontological dignity, there's the moral dignity, the social dignity, and extended dignity. And the most important is the ontological dignity, which says the person is afforded dignity simply because he or she exists and is willed and created and loved by God. Well, thank you very much. I hope this was interesting for you. Thank you very much.